Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take a stack of information, extract the most important insights, and give you that shortcut to being truly well informed. Today, we're embarking on, well, a pretty fascinating journey through a brief history of England. Our mission is to unpack the key moments, those surprising turns, and, the enduring impacts that have really shaped this nation. It's all drawn directly from the sources you provided us. We're talking everything from the very earliest human settlements right up to the challenges of modern times. So get ready for a deep dive into centuries of change and also continuity. Okay, let's start at the very beginning then. We're exploring the earliest evidence of human habitation in what we now call England. Our sources point to sites like Boxgrove Man, that's 500,000 years ago, and flint tools at Clacton-on-Sea from maybe 400,000 years ago. It's kind of a striking detail, though, that much of England actually became uninhabitable around 400,000 years ago because the sea levels rose.
Right, and what's truly fascinating here is how these early Mesolithic hunter-gatherer societies, this is around 9250, 9140 BCE, they ingeniously utilized that subglacial landscape, the North Sea lowlands. The sources really emphasize that these sea level-driven immigration events, they pushed the coast southwards, and that created what are now, quote, globally important archaeological at-risk sites. It just shows how geology and climate have, well, always dictated where people could live and move.
So moving forward in time a bit, the Neolithic and Bronze Ages saw the emergence of really significant settlements. We're talking about places like Bath, which the source suggests had human activity way back, maybe at 200,000 years ago, and obviously the iconic Stonehenge, dating to around 5,000 years ago. This era is just defined by these incredible structures, the long barrows, henges, those impressive stone circles.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the arrival of agriculture was just a huge turning point. The sources describe these landscape-scale transformations of Neolithic society, not as a simple switch, but as, and this is a quote, a vastly more complex picture involving many ways of social, environmental, and economic change, which mirrors the broader patterns you see across European prehistory, really.
Yeah.
It also highlights a pretty significant gap in our understanding. The sources note there's a sorely lacking comprehension of Britain's Neolithic society before agriculture came along.
Right. Then the Bronze Age, around 2000 BCE, brought, well, increasing social complexities. You can see that pretty clearly in the changes to burial spaces. This period also saw the development of that unique beaker culture. They're known for their distinctive patterned ceramics and some intriguing burial practices like burying stone axes.
Yeah, that points towards growing stratification, maybe more ritualization in society. The development of a distinct material culture like the beaker pottery, it suggests, evolving trade networks, shared identities, perhaps even early forms of social hierarchy based on controlling resources or skilled craftwork. It shows a society becoming more defined, more organized.
Okay, and finally, as we approach around 500 BC, the Iron Age brought the arrival of Celtic peoples. This meant new languages like Welsh, Cornish, Gaelic, and the formation of treble kingdoms with walled towns and those impressive hill forts really shaped the cultural landscape.
Now, let's fast forward a bit to a really transformative period, the Roman influence. It kicked off with Julius Caesar's initial invasions in 55 BC, but it culminated in Emperor Claudius's full-scale conquest in 43 AD. And for the next, 366 years, England was basically part of the Roman Empire. Huge development, profound change. Right. And what's fascinating is the sheer scale and the motivation behind Claudius's invasion in 43 CE. The sources describe it as, quote, the most thorough invasion of an island in the North Atlantic by an empire yet seen.
Wow.
And the decision wasn't just about grabbing resources, although that was part of it. Prestige through warfare was paramount in Roman society, and Britain was seen as potentially the richest province the empire possessed, maybe second only to Egypt.
So power, glory, and resources, the whole package.
Brilliant, yeah.
Roman rule saw the reorganization of the land into provinces and the building of iconic structures we still know today, Hadrian's Wall, Watling Street, the Roman baths in Bath. But it wasn't all smooth sailing, right? The sources mention problems like persistent piracy and Roman authority gradually breaking down because of increasing barbarian raids.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But the impact on infrastructure, on daily life, was just profound. The sources detail how communities evolved from elementary buildings to proper wooden houses, paving, bridges, and soon people in England started adopting Roman tech like chimney flues, flagstones, and improved storage. It's quite remarkable, actually, that many roads built then still frequently obey Roman rules, even today. It's a real testament to their engineering.
Yeah, that's incredible. Then the fall of Roman Britain, around 410 AD, that was a pivotal moment. The Britons tried to govern themselves, but they just couldn't afford to pay the armies anymore, which left them really vulnerable to raids from northern tribes, Picts, Scots, Saxons.
Exactly. The sources quote the rescript of 410 CE, which is basically the Roman emperor saying quite starkly, "No protector remains for the people, there you are on your own." Yet it's intriguing, isn't it, that the Britons still felt themselves as Romans, even after the empire pulled out. The sources contrast Roman rule, which they say governed as voluntarily and respected homes and lands, with what came next. With the Cymri, who apparently slew or hanged all educators in the Roman tradition, adulterated the ecclesiastic estates, and dismantled the fortified towns.
So a real period of upheaval.
Definitely. A society trying to find its feet after centuries of being governed from outside.
Okay, so after the Romans left, the sources talk about an ephemeral dark age, a time where nothing certain, not even fears could be said. Bit mysterious. But then a really foundational figure emerged. Bede the Venerable, often called the father of Anglo-Saxon history. He was abbot, historian, theologian of Jarrow.
Yeah, and what's crucial about this period is how the sources describe England. They call it a holy island, overrun with waves of invasions during the early Middle Ages. Bede's significance is just immense. Not only was he a prolific writer, but his ecclesiastical history of England in 5 tomes effectively documented this whole period. It provided a, quote, sacred compost of many blessings, miracles, and sacraments.
Wow, sacred compost.
He basically laid the groundwork for recorded English history as we know it.
And the area we now know as England was settled by various Anglo-Saxon tribes. Angles, Saxons, Jutes, starting around the mid-5th century. This led to those distinct small kingdoms forming across the land, like Kent, Mercia, East Anglia, Northumbria, and Wessex.
And if we look at the broader sweep of events, these Anglo-Saxon kingdoms then faced a new, pretty formidable challenge.
The Vikings.
Ah, yes, the Vikings.
Starting with that Lindisfarne raid in 793, these raids caused widespread plunder and instability. But King Alfred of Wessex, he implemented a more structured defense. That led to the decisive Battle of Edington in 878.
And that battle, plus the Treaty of Wedmore that followed, carved out the Danelaw, a region under Viking control. But it also, importantly, laid the foundation for a unified England, culminating in Athelstan becoming the first king of England in 930.
And Christianity was absolutely central to how these Anglo-Saxon states developed, wasn't it? Augustine of Canterbury was sent on a formal papal mission for a unified Christianization effort.
Yes, but the sources reveal Christianity developed markedly differently among the Anglo-Saxons compared to the existing Hiberno-Latin Church over in Ireland. Augustine called a meeting at a Roman fortified post, which literally translated to the meeting place, specifically to sort out key differences, things like the date of Easter, how baptism was administered. He was seeking homogeneity for the faith.
Interesting.
The sources even suggest that Ireland's religious independence meant it was, and I quote, doubtful that Ireland would have been safe from being colonized by the Anglo-Saxon state if its own Christian tradition has persisted so strongly.
Okay, now we've arrived at arguably one of the most pivotal dates in English history, 1066, the Norman Conquest. The backstory involves King Edward the Confessor apparently bestowing the throne on Duke William of Normandy. But then Harold, son of Godwin, Earl of Wessex, unwisely crowns himself king.
Yeah, and the sources paint a really vivid picture of the Battle of Hastings. They detail this significant imbalance in military strength, William's forces. Larger, better organized, featuring knights in heavy armor. Harold's army, on the other hand, was hastily put together. Unpaid and untrained, ill-led and disorganized foot soldiers, the source calls them, Thearings.
Thearings, okay.
The battle itself was brutal, ending with William's forces breaking through Harold's lines, a real testament to strategic military advantage.
And the impact of William's conquest was just immediate and, well, huge. England was ruthlessly conquered. A completely new Norman nobility replaced the Anglo-Saxon elite. Big shift in power, and this era saw feudalism formalized with defined duties and rights.
Exactly. And what's truly fascinating here is how the Norman invasion just revolutionized English society from the ground up. It set up a whole new network of local lords, changed all the administrative units for jurisdiction, taxation, and military obligation. Interestingly, the high costs of building all those castles which they needed for control actually forced lords to grant revenues and autonomy to lesser lords and knights. Which basically gave birth to the feudal system we associate with this period. It even, arguably, contributed to the emergence of early constitutional ideas.
Right. Now, the source in this section on the Norman Conquest also jumps forward quite a bit in time. It describes how much later, in the latter part of the 18th century, the Industrial Revolution fundamentally transformed England.
Yeah, that's an interesting placement in the source material. It talks about shifting from an agricultural to an industrialized nation, moving from rural villages to towns, common farming to commercial agriculture, and the arrival of public improvements in cities.
It's a thematic grouping, I suppose, even across centuries.
Seems like it. The source highlights that this later Industrial Revolution era saw energy shift from water to coal, new manufactures in textiles, iron, leading to new views of labor. It also points out that English merchant capitalism had moved out of its medieval shell much earlier, actually, with the founding of the Tudor dynasty, so it connects different periods of economic change.
Okay, interesting. Let's get back to the timeline. The Plantagenet dynasty, including figures like Henry II, Richard I, John, Henry III ruled from 1154 to 1272, a period of big growth and change. Henry II notably enlarged the kingdom through marriage and conquest.
And Richard I, the Lionheart, he stands out, doesn't he? One of the most famous kings in the Middle Ages. Courage, warrior prowess. The sources portray him as a great crusader king, even linking him to Arthurian legends. His efforts in the Third Crusade, the Siege of Acre, battles against Saladin, described as intense, challenging, but really cementing his reputation.
Then his brother, King John, reigning 1199 to 1216, generally seen quite differently. A weak ruler, described as pompous and ill-favored, a complete contrast to the soldier king, Richard. He faced bitter quarrels, especially with the Archbishop of Canterbury, and mounting baronial discontent due to excessive taxing pushed things to the limit.
Yes, but what's truly fascinating, despite his personal failings, John's reign led to one of the most pivotal moments in legal history, Magna Carta. He was forced to sign the Magna Carta Libertatum at Runnymede in 1215. This charter was just monumental. It guaranteed communal rights against the crown, effectively putting limits on royal power for the first time in such a formal way.
Huge moment.
The sources even vividly describe his desperation, apparently cursing God and praying for a French invasion because he was so angry about being forced to sign it.
Wow. This period also saw the start of the 100 Years' War. That was Edward III claiming the French throne through his mother, right?
That's the one. The sources detail significant English victories early on, Crécy, Poitiers. They even captured King John II to France, which let Edward plunder the southern France.
Yeah.
But the war also brings to life that remarkable figure, Joan of Arc, a young peasant girl of Domremy.
Joan of Arc, yeah.
Her visions urging her to save France apparently transformed her into a military genius. She liberated Orléans, led Charles VII to his coronation at Reims, fundamentally altering the course of the war. Incredible story.
Absolutely. Okay, let's turn now to the Tudor dynasty, ruling England and Wales from 1485 to 1603, starting with Henry VII, ending with Elizabeth I.
Henry VIII is certainly the most famous Tudor, though maybe, as the source says, not for his achievements so much as his actions.
Fair point.
The sources highlight he was in charge of the Church of England, either indirectly or directly, and his many marriages and the annulment of marriage processes constitute the Church of England's birth. The Reformation in England, the sources state, was a momentous event. It gradually diffused the longing for a higher life, for a personal and immediate relation with God, profoundly reshaping English society, spirituality.
Then Elizabeth I presented as a truly transformative figure. Our sources credit her with reversing the decline of her father's religious reforms, making her the most notable monarch of the Tudor dynasty and the father of the English Renaissance. Quite the title.
It is, and what's particularly fascinating about Elizabeth is the source's description of her complex or dangerous foreign policy. It was a direct response to these threats from, strong Spain and restless France.
Tough position.
Definitely. Despite some early ignominious concessions, her scrupulous intelligence in adapting her father's tactics, devices of feigned fealty, wily bargaining, and intrigues ultimately helped preserve peace with France and place Spain in a position where open war was both unfeasible and deemed too dangerous. She is a master diplomat.
And Tudor England also saw these profound societal and cultural changes, really setting it apart.
Yes, the sources highlight this as the first modern England. Cities like Shrewsbury became market towns, agriculture became market-driven, a banking system started to develop. These changes weren't just economic. They fostered a new self-awareness, a sense of identity and purpose, as England finally found its European position, the beginning of a national consciousness, defining what it meant to be English.
Right. Then the Stuart era. began with Elizabeth I's death in 1603 and the unexpected arrival of James VI of Scotland, who became James VI of England, unifying the crowns.
Hmm. And this period was incredibly tumultuous. Charles I, described as a weak king, deeply distrusted Parliament. He kept trying to raise funds without parliamentary approval, famously reviving the ship money tax.
Which didn't go down well.
Not at all. It ultimately sparked widespread conflict, the War of Three Kingdoms in 1637, the Roundhead War in 1642, civil war, basically.
And this conflict saw the rise of Oliver Cromwell and his disciplined New Model army, which eventually led to the capture and, quite unprecedentedly, the sentencing to death of the king himself.
Yes, a radical transformation. After 60 years of civil conflicts, England became a commonwealth. But the sources emphasize republicanism and democracy quickly perished under Cromwell's protectorate. Cromwell also passed laws against Catholics in Ireland, a stark reminder of the religious and political divisions of that time. A brief, turbulent experiment with republican rule that slid into military dictatorship.
Then the Restoration. Charles II, in 1660, apparently heartily welcomed throughout the Be Free. People wanted security and stability after all that chaos. But Charles found no treasury, no army, and no clear policies. And ultimately, he had no real power against Parliament.
Yeah, it raises an interesting question about the public mood then. The sources point out this intense demand for justice against regicides. It led to trials and executions, even lynched spies, slaughtered delinquents, and gallows at street corners.
Grim times.
The sources suggest Charles took command by the most desperate natures among his new subjects. Now, interestingly, the source gives a date for Charles being proclaimed king as May 8, 631, which seems like a typo for 1660 given the context, but that's what the material says.
Okay, sticking to the source. The Glorious Revolution of 1688. James II tried to advance Catholic interests, met strong opposition, leading to an invitation for William of Orange to land in England.
Right. The sources describe the Protestant bishops issuing a remonstrance on the illegality of James's actions, highlights the deep political and religious tension. William's arrival at Torbay with 15,000 men was strategic, greeted by shouts of "No king," apparently. His calculated moves, like commissioning plans for St. Paul's Cathedral before even taking the throne, proposing appointments, it all led to James fleeing. William's army advanced without resistance, ushered in a new era of parliamentary supremacy.
Okay, moving into the 18th century, 1714 to 1830, the House of Hanover rules Great Britain. It's quite ironic, isn't it? George III's ignorance of English customs inadvertently helped the cabinet system develop because ministers had to manage things. And under George III, Britain really dominated globally expanding influence in the Americas, India.
This period largely covered the Age of Enlightenment, roughly mid-16th to mid-19th century, according to the source states, characterized by the rise of rationalism in philosophy, ethics, and theology, led to a fundamental shift in thinking the idea that the physical universe based on mechanical principles was incapable of miracles.
Big shift.
Yeah. The sources note that empirical scientific investigation about the natural observables of a material universe dominated knowledge and politics, pushing England towards science, towards industrial innovation.
Which leads us neatly into probably the most massive development of this era. The Industrial Revolution fundamentally transformed England.
Absolutely. What's fascinating is how the impulse of the Industrial Revolution in the later 18th century shifted energy from water to coal. That fueled new manufactures and mechanization, textiles, iron, transport via canals, railways.
Everything changed.
Completely. The sources highlight this transformed England from agricultural to industrialized. But this rapid change also brought huge social problems: child labor, widow employment, and shift job roles, which directly paved the way for the emergence of trade unions as workers tried to fight back.
And Britain's colonial expansion continued during this time, founding colonies in North America, which eventually led to the American Revolutionary War.
Yes, though the sources highlight a profound continuity. Those 13 colonies remained culturally English-speaking and Protestant, and their citizens developed a knowledge of self-government. It's an interesting perspective in the source, suggesting America's independence was partly due to the reluctance of British politicians and generals to devote adequate attention to the struggle, while Britain simultaneously won in India what had been lost in America, a strategic pivot in empire.
Okay, Queen Victoria's reign, 1837 to 1901. Often seen as this pivotal turning point, the height of British power and influence.
It is, and what's fascinating here is the source's detailed glimpse into her early life, always marked by the influence of her ambitious mother and the watchful eye of Sir John Conroy. It even suggests quite critically that her educators and bureaucracy became proud enough to teach Victoria an illimitable contempt for her starving subjects, offers a sharp perspective on her imperial mindset and the social divide.
Wow, okay. This period also built on earlier social reforms. Our sources note that Tudor legislation actually started addressing poverty as a local issue way before Victoria.
Right. The sources describe the challenges of the 1572 Pauper Act.
Yeah.
Despite qualified success, it led to unforeseen consequences, like a rise in vagabonds. And this is a diverse group. Thieves, rogues, witches, Puritans, and professed tax dodgers. It prompted an intricate system of laws and eventually a social reform crusade to address the multitude, the indecorum, and the foreignness of these beggars. Shows how early attempts at social welfare often had complex, unintended effects.
And Victorian England also represented the absolute high point of British imperialism and global influence, really, those pre-World War I years.
The sources illustrate how the material successes of the empire meant royal and festive occasions at home were celebrated with grand parades and processions, and the populace was thoroughly involved. Big displays of power. Yet there was also this deep-rooted fear of disorder in their own cities, which drove efforts in reforming the home rule and lightening the foreign burden. The sources suggest that for some, the shrinking empire could be viewed as a swankier stage of life denied, hinting at the complex psychology of an imperial power, maybe even sensing its peak.
Fascinating. Now, as we enter the 20th century, a period of just fundamental transformation for England, marked profoundly by two world wars, huge shifts in global power.
Yeah, World War I, 1914, 1918, described as a pivotal date. It effectively disappeared four major European empires, saw the United States emerge onto worldwide politics as one of the two global powers. The sources note that this cataclysm led Europe to question if progress could mean something fatal for the whole of mankind, a real crisis of confidence.
Then World War II, 1939, 1945, began with a series of disasters for Britain, loss of communication routes, etc. But it concluded with Allied triumph, though alongside the devastating impact of the atomic bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which absolutely altered the course of history.
And despite being among the victors, post-war Britain was devastated. It experienced intensified international isolation. Why? The speedy loss of the empire, the defeat in the Suez Crisis.
Big blows to prestige.
Huge. The sources suggest this period led to a more cynical and introspective approach to diplomacy as the nation grappled with its changed place in the world.
So modern England, emerging from all that, faced a new set of challenges, significant internal changes too.
Yes. What's particularly striking is the immediate post-war rapid change in consciousness and administration. The sources highlight the opening of the first National Health Service Hospital on July 5, 1948, and extensive nationalization of key industries, really defining moments.
The welfare state.
Exactly. The sources poetically describe modern England as a new figure of a height, like a giant dwarf, grappling with impotences of all orders, but also most conscious of itself.
A giant dwarf. That's evocative.
It is. It implies a nation maybe diminished in global stature, but also intensely self-aware, processing a history where, quote, destruction swells into saturation and piles up immeasurable. A lot to unpack there.
Wow. What an absolutely incredible journey we've taken through the history of England, from those prehistoric origins right up to the complexities of the modern era. It's just so clear that this nation has been in a constant state of flux, shaped by invasions, innovations, internal struggles.
Indeed. And understanding this long narrative of change, adaptation, resilience, as detailed in our sources, it really does illuminate the present, doesn't it? England has consistently redefined itself through periods of immense challenge and prosperity. Shows a remarkable capacity for, well, reinvention.
So what does this all mean for you listening? We've seen how England has repeatedly navigated just immense turmoil and disruption, only to rebuild and redefine itself. The sources, for instance, end with that glimpse into Henry II's reign, where a prosperous kingdom and omnipotent royal power emerged after a period of chaos and anarchy. This powerful notion, right, of flourishing structures built from the ashes, that's not unique to Henry II's time. It feels like a recurring theme. So what does England's centuries-long journey of rebuilding and redefinition, often from periods of deep crisis, suggest about the very nature of national identity and resilience in a world that's constantly in motion? Something to think about. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it sparks some new insights, maybe even a few aha moments for you. We'll be back soon with another deep dive into a new stack of sources.